Hi folks, you're with Taskless Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the effects of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, not only on Britain and the economy, but the effect on Europe and I guess its overall participation in what today we would call the globalist project, or what came to be known as the globalist project. Now, there's a lot of information going around about Margaret Thatcher there's probably as much myth, if not more myth, than reality. And a number of YouTubers have sort of mentioned this recently as they look at the demise and decay of Britain. The name of Margaret Thatcher and her term in office in nearly 10 years is often mentioned, and the effects of it, or the supposed effects, or the imagined effects, maybe is more accurate there. This was recently brought up by, and if you haven't been over there, have a look at the channel of a guy called Richard IV. And you don't have to agree with everything he says, but he's doing something a little bit different and talking about some different issues and putting maybe a different angle on some of the issues that are talked about. So worth having a look. But he brought up the Margaret Thatcher thing. He's probably getting close to 20 years younger than me. So now I remember from Australia. I remember the Thatcher years, and I was a frequent business visitor to Britain, sort of during the latter part of the Thatcher years and following that. So I was able to see firsthand some of the effects and talk to the locals about it. So let me just set the scene here. Following World War II, with the surprise election to many, the election of a Labor government, quite a socialist-leaning Labor government in many ways. They wanted to nationalise the railways and nationalise coal and nationalise. And what they didn't nationalise, they tried to politicise and influence, often with good intentions, by the way, but their socialist take and socialist, we can organise the economy. Now, during wartime, and Britain never had the resources, military or financial, to fight World War II. So the role of Britain in world affairs diminished, acutely as a result of their attempting to fight that war, which again, economically, militarily, they just couldn't really fight it. They shouldn't have gone into that war. With hindsight, and it's easy to look back today, that they would have done better cutting a deal with Hitler, who was offering quite generous terms, by the way, initially at least. But moving on to that, Britain went on a path of socialism, and during the war, when Russia and Britain and America had been allies, the Russians had very successfully infiltrated the British trade unions, academia, and all over the place in British industry and so on. And some of the people that the Labor Party were putting in charge of economic development and industrial development, they were very Marxist communists in their view. Again, not their intentions were bad. Their intentions weren't. They did want a British industry, whether it be motor vehicle manufacturing or coal mining or advanced technology and computers. They wanted these things to be, so these business and industries companies to be successful, but they approached it from a very Marxist viewpoint. And so they had the Marxism at one side, and then at the very apex of things, the CEOs and that sort of thing, that was British class cronyism on steroids. And the two together, and then the trade union activism, the three together, meant that Britain just spiraled out of control. Now, and ending, and if you look it up, sort of the time, what was called the Winter of Discontent, where there were so many strikes and that you couldn't even put the lights on, the garbage wasn't being collected. There was a 3-day work week, and it was a disaster all round. There was attempts at wages and price freezes to stop inflation, but Britain was out of control, and there was a view that Britain was now the poor man of Europe. not long after this, or late, not those times necessarily, but even in the 1980s when I was traveling around Europe, I remember there was I was sitting with a bunch of people in where was it, Brussels, I think, and we were talking about the economies of Europe, and everybody at the table was unanimous that Britain was now the sick man of Europe. The people can't afford it, they're poor, it's a place that has no future, it's yesterday's country, and so on. Such was the view of Britain, that it had fallen from being the mighty Britain of the 1930s into being some pathetic lost, wandering wandering around geriatric, suffering from mental health problems. It was seen very, very differently, but you couldn't find anyone on the continent, at least, that would have a kind word about Britain. So it was considered to be just a lost case, a basket case, heading to be a basket case, and with justification, by the way. If you look at you look at all sorts of things, that compromises that could have been made that weren't, opportunities lost, and so on. So when the discontent reached a certain point, socialism was seen as having failed, and there was a need for something different. Along comes Margaret Thatcher, and the despondency and the demoralisation of the British political class and many other areas of society was such that it was only that demoralisation that would have permitted a Margaret Thatcher to come along. She had sort of simple remedies, or what were perceived as simple remedies, and we're going to fix this. We'll break the power of the unions. We'll do this. We'll do that. Now, the power of the unions in itself wasn't. The unions overused their power, and with the industrial militancy was just over the top. But the quality of management, the class management on steroids at the top, a lot of those people, you wouldn't have hired them to sweep the floor, let alone, but they were Sir this and Lord that, and so they had the esteem of it that was held by some quarters, at least, with a class-based society, particularly against the backdrop of socialism. And so the quality of management was diabolically bad, and but Britain had a lot of fantastic design engineers. All the ingredients necessary for a very successful advanced technology society were there. They just never were able to get during the socialist period, and subsequently, by the way, have never been able to get that in place. So I watched with amusement as a young man, watched the British automobile industry disappear down the gurgler, watching their attempts at being players in the international computer scene being diabolically mismanaged and mishandled and fumbled, and the list just went on. And I looked around at what was happening, and it's astonished me that they could fuck it up so badly. Anyway, along comes Margaret Thatcher, and she says, "I've got these solutions." The unions decided to fight it out with Thatcher and the Thatcher government rather than come to the table and negotiate a deal. That was a fatal mistake. But equally, it was a fatal mistake of Thatcher and the management, I believe, this is my view, to actually force them to sit down and say, no, we are going to keep these coal mines open, but there are things we're going to have to do. This is not a debate. You're going to have to do it. It's unavoidable here. But instead, it was viewed, all too hard, close the mines down, that's it, fuck you all. And so there was a screw you, screw you type attitude that was going back on all sides. Nobody was really wanting to sit down and cut a deal, which was, at that time, that was the only way out. Now, I watched the computer companies like ICL, that sort of thing. It was pretty fragmented and broken up. So the Labor government had decided, well, why don't we get all these small computer companies, put them together under one roof and create a big conglomerate? Now, okay, that creates economies of scale and so on. But the way they went about it was to politicize it. So say, okay, everyone get together and we'll provide you with some government handouts, but there are things you have to do You have to engage in elements of social engineering. Friends and relatives of the Labor Party and their mistresses, you have to give them good jobs, prestigious jobs. You have to locate factories and assembly plants in areas where we tell you you have to do it for political reasons, where unemployment might be high. So there was an ongoing politicization. So whereas the initial solution, let's get these businesses together under one roof, they just threw them together and then just hope for the best, and in the maelstrom hoping something would come out of it, and then imposed politicized political conditions on them. So the computer industry that could have, by the way, been very successful, there was some pretty smart technology going out, that was ruined. The opportunities were gone. I went to, as a young guy, I went to some meetings with the ICL crowd, or I don't think it was ICL at that point, and sitting down looking at them and thinking, what are you guys doing here? I mean, talk about the bureaucracy on steroids. They just mad people sitting around at meetings all day, talking about the finer points of something esoteric, no one getting on with doing business. And then they had these odd remedies. They decided, they got some consultants in that told them that they were wasting too much time at meetings that had no purpose. So they thought, I know what we'll do. Every time we have a meeting, we'll declare the reason we're having the meeting. That'll solve it. And then they had twice as many meetings because they had all these invented reasons for it. And you could see you guys only the last 5 minutes. And also the mistakes in the automobile thing, the quality of management was diabolical. The unions were uncooperative, same in coal mines, same pretty much every area of business. So Thatcher comes in, closes the coal mines. So the loss-making industries that the government was pouring money into, instead of saying, well, let's look at this and say, how can we efficiently spend the money and make these, let's make these industries successful. What must we do to do that? Instead of doing that, the Thatcher government and their ethos was, no, we've poured enough money into that. It's not getting it, which is not unreasonable, by the way. It's not getting anywhere. Let's close it down or let's sell it off. Let's sell the British Rail to a private consortium. Now, the private consortium comes along and says, okay, well, we'll happily buy British Rail, but we want two things. We want to keep the monopoly, because remember, it's government owned. We want to keep the monopoly, and we want the ability to raise prices to whatever we want to raise them to. And there were some protections, but the government, if the government wants to sell British Rail, it's okay, we're going to have to compete with other rail. We're going to sell bits of it off to various competitors if you want to create a market competition thing here so prices don't rise. Then private investments, we're not interested in that. We don't want to buy a business where we've got to compete. Not pass on that. We're only prepared to pay you a lot of money to buy British Rail or any other, it could be the telecoms, it could be anything. We're only prepared to pay you a lot of money if A, it's a monopoly, and B, we're protected against price competition for at least a decade, if not forever. And then we'll pay you a lot of money. And we'll not only do that, we'll make sure that government hacks, goons, mistresses, and flunkies are given important jobs in the new venture. So we'll sweeten the deal there. So all these governments they went for, and this is part of the globalization project, of course, kicking off in Britain, that it was sold to all the stuff was sold to private industry, not to the benefit of the public, but meant that the government didn't have to continually pour money into these things inefficiently. They had a choice. Look, too hard, it can't be bothered, let's just get rid of it, or let's make it efficient. Because if they made it efficient and effective, then they would have automatically delivered better quality public services to people, better quality of life. Automatically, that would have been, by making this efficient, they'd have maintained or created jobs or kept many more jobs and ultimately were lost through. So in the midst of ideology, mismanagement, different sides trying to face each other down, different sides saying, yeah, we'll screw you, Jack, and that sort of thing, that it just all disappeared. So what did Thatcher do in the end? Well, the loss-making was gone. The pouring money into loss-making ventures was gone. But in the end, the problem, the overall problem, what are we going to do about jobs? What are we going to do about efficient industries? What are we going to do about world competitive industries? And again, they put some thought into this. Even the Labor government, the socialists, put thought into this. The good intentions don't good results make. So in the end, the political class threw their hands up in the air and handed over all of these things to the private sector. In other words, the big financiers that now pretty much control Britain. But did Thatcher solve problems? Well, in her view, she had. She said, well, we're giving hundreds of millions of dollars every year to, the coal mines, for example, to subsidise them, or to the rail or whatever it was. So if we can stop that loss, we can stop the losses throwing money at these things, then hey, what an accomplishment. We're now an efficient government. But no, they weren't. So this is the rub. Did Thatcher solve problems, or just simply move them around? So turning off the taxpayer-funded spigot to these organisations, these groups, it meant that it was going to be sold off to the private sector financiers that would then charge 10 times more than had been charged for delivering a no better or even a lesser service, a lesser quality service. And I've travelled on British trains on both sides, when the government owned them and when the private sector owned them. And gee whiz, if there was a difference, I don't know, but the price was different. So people had to pay a lot more simply because the private sector had paid too much to the government to buy them, and then wanted to turn it into a supernormal profit return in a monopoly sector. That was hardly a benefit. The public didn't benefit from that. Now, the Thatcher people said, well, we gave you tax cuts. So that's, okay. But that's not enough to offset the extra cost of all these things, whether it be rail or water or coal or energy. The tax cuts don't cover those extra costs we have to meet. So what did Thatcher do? Well, in the end, she gave the financial sector a big shot in the arm, because they now could buy up all the monopoly assets in Britain and turn them into supernormal profit-making machines. So the financial sector did okay. But the reality was, she just moved the problem around. The problems were never solved. The problem of how does Britain create world-class, world competitive industries in the newer industries, such as computers and technology, that wasn't solved. That they didn't deal with that. In the end, they walked away from it. That too hard. So there was either cozy jobs for their friends at the apex of these groups, or there was cozy deals being cut with trade unions, but there was never an attempt to solve the problem. Or if there was, it was half-hearted. So when you close down the coal mines and create unemployment, what have you actually solved? Okay, we're not pouring money into loss-making. Well, fine, I get that. But you could have made, not all, but many of those mines viable. Sure, you're going to lose jobs. You can have a lot more automation. You're going to do a lot of things there. Maybe loadings on shifts or so. Okay, but there are things you can do. Look at what you can do and do those, rather than walk away from it saying it's all too hard. Not that the Thatcher government was on their own to blame here. The trade unions need to shoulder some, if not a great deal of the blame on this. But there were people of good intentions, people of faith, of good faith, sitting down, trying to solve it. And those people were absent, or they were too busy bickering and fighting. So problems were moved around. So, okay, well, we'll just send those factories offshore. We'll send it to China or some cheap labor place. So again, these things weren't solved. Jobs were moved out, factories moved out, technology was lost, research facilities were lost, energy opportunities to improve public transport and public services. These were all lost and frittered away. And the only beneficiaries really were the big international finance. Now, sure, the power of unions was broken, and that for the more active, militant, disruptive unions, that maybe was a good thing. But instead of reforming the unions and turning them into partners in making Britain successful, the agitation and the confrontation continued. Again, that's moving a problem around. That's not solving a problem. So my assessment of the Thatcher years was You could point to, I suppose, some successes, but in terms of the not putting money into loss-making enterprises. But as you spin the wheel around and come around to the 180 degrees, you say, well, hold on, that the tax cuts you got from that and the extra cost you have to pay, the tax cuts weren't enough. So the benefit of the tax cut, which have since been eaten up anyway, is in the end result was that the people lost assets, such as the public transport infrastructure. The people lost assets, but really gained nothing in return, and they're being screwed royally by big international finance. So when people sort of say, well, London is still a big international finance, I say, well, sure, but only because the big finance can get these supernormal monopoly market protected profits. Without that, Britain wouldn't have that. London wouldn't be that international or supposed international finance hub. But all that's happened is that the wealth that was spread out amongst the country and amongst the businesses, the mines and the different industries has just come in and concentrated in the capital, London, and gone into the pockets of big finance. So my argument is, sure, some successes, but in reality, the Thatcher years simply moved the problem around and passed the cost of solving problems onto the populace, and in the end, that resulted in their reduced standard of living. So I would give the report card and the Thatcher government, at best, a modest pass. You've been fantastic today. Your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.